I want to get your quick thoughts on how you see their impact being in fantasy immediately and career. So we're just going to start at the top. We'll go Conor Bedard, number one. What is the best way to describe what he will be as a fantasy player?
Phenom, superstar. It won't be long till he's. You're wondering if you're picking him or McDavid first overall in the draft. And I think it's really exciting to see a guy like this. For someone who follows prospects like myself, you always are waiting for a guy like this, someone that gets you really excited about like following the draft, watching him every single time. And every time you watch Bedard play, it's like he does something you just don't expect. So a guy of that talent, it's unbelievable to see. So yeah, he's going to be someone who's going to hit 100 points, no problem for a long time, challenging for MVP titles. I think the question is, going to the Chicago Blackhawks, how quick will that be? I don't think it's going to be immediate. I think I would be shocked if he's not hitting 70 points next year. Kind of regardless of who he plays with, just because he could generate everything and he's so deceptive. And he's been growing up playing against pro hockey goalies in the summer and training on that and learning how to score on them. So it's not like he's going to be like total uncharted water here. So I expect, easily the best prospect in this draft, easily the best prospect since McDavid. He's going to have an incredible career.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. What I'm most curious about with Conor Bedard as well is, as you pointed out in a story you did earlier this year, his physical play is underrated. So I'm curious, because they don't track hits the same way in junior levels, you don't really know what a guy's going to contribute to banger leagues until he arrives at the NHL level. And I'm very excited to see if Bedard is a guy who generates a lot of hits, because that could make his value go through the roof. Should be very interesting to see. And number two, of course, we have Adam Fantilli. And I think it's strange that people are kind of, I don't want to say sleeping on him, but like overlooking that he's a really great prospect as well.
Yeah, I think it's kind of strange because you look at it and like he finished his like college season in April, and then he won the Hobie Baker, and he was the top scorer, and it feels like that was like a century ago. And at some points I feel like I'm underrating him myself, and I've been following his game since he was 14, 15 years old. It's seeing him at the World Championship, struggled a little bit at the beginning, even got kicked out of a game, but when he got comfortable near the end, that was a guy that showed that he had something, that he could play pro hockey. And it's going to take a bit of an adjustment period for him, but going and playing college I think was the great move for him, because whether or not he goes back for one more year, he will have that experience of this past year of playing against older competition. A lot of players that he played with and against are going to be pro players next year, so he got that experience. But it just, like, this is a guy that I was talking to Frank Cervelli yesterday. He was asking me, like, who would you say is kind of a comparable for him? And I see there's a bit of Jonathan Toews and a bit of Evgeny Malkin in him. Big forward, commands the ice, great shot, good skater. He can absolutely take control of a shift. And doing it against college level is one thing, but again, college level, like when you get to the national championship stage, you're playing a lot of older teams with older players that have been doing this for a lot longer. And he was a freshman and was dominating. That really rarely comes up. We're looking at some of the best freshman seasons by draft eligible player. You're looking at Paul Correa and Jack Eichel and now Adam Fantilli. So he's in good mode here. I think a lot of his value will be in other categories. He likes to get physical, so he will do that. But he also can score, playmaker. He can do all of that. So he's a guy that should be able to contribute in most categories for him.
All right, I'd be very excited to get him in my fantasy draft. And again, I'm rebuilding next year, so I'm going to be looking closely at all of these guys because I don't have a first round pick. So when that second round turn comes in my keeper league, I'll have my eye on Bedard and Fantilli if either is still there. Number three projected pick, another player who I'm really excited about, and he showed he can really hang with men. Of course, playing at the Worlds recently. That's Leo Carlson.
Yeah, and I think Kevin watched kind of Sweden's games a lot. There were a lot of times where Leo Carlson did look quiet, and I would still argue I wouldn't say argue because he was, but he was the best draft eligible prospect in that tournament for sure. But there were games where he definitely was quiet. That being said, the coaching staff never took him off the top line. Whether or not that was the right call is up to debate. But he was always playing with Lucas Raymond. He always had another NHLer that had a side there. Would it be Jonathan Berggren? Would it be Alex Nylander? So he had some good players to play with and learn from, and that seemed to really work in his favor. And he is another big body, 6'3". He uses it, but he uses it mostly kind of in front of the net to create those rebounds, to create those chances. He can get a lot of shots on net. I think he will be a high volume player if your league counts things like shots. It's I think he goes to Columbus at this point. I think he will be the number 3 pick, and if he is, it might not be long until he's playing with Johnny Gaudreau and guys like that. Like he could, I think he's got as good of a case as anybody in the top 5 to play in the NHL next year. Whether or not that's the whole season, I don't know. But you got guys like Kent Johnson, you got guys like that should make this Blue Jackets team a bit more fun to watch next year. You throw in a guy like Carlson, who's got nothing to lose. He's got all this pro experience already and played well. Putting up 21 points might not seem a lot, but doing that as a draft eligible prospect in a top European pro league is very difficult because those leagues don't care about player development if there's a chance you're going to the NHL. They care about winning because that's they're not affiliated with NHL teams. They're not a prospect pool landscape for these teams. Like they care about winning, and they still play Leo Carlson a lot in Örebro. I think that stands out kind of how important of a player he is. So, I'd say he's going to be a great player too.
Yeah, and the idea of him in Columbus is pretty exciting, and it's to me like Columbus is starting to build something, especially if you factor in that Zach Werenski was out for the year and that David Juracek was playing in the AHL most of the year. Like you could add Leo Carlson, for example, but then you add like Provorov, Severson, Werenski, and Juracek to that defense. Like that's a completely new team. So to me, that's going to be a fun team to watch next year in terms of just their development path really accelerating. Okay, number 4. This is probably, aside from Bedard, the most interesting prospect on the board, Matvei Michkov. We know the talent's off the charts. We don't know when he's going to play. It sounds like he's going to be present for the draft, which maybe sends a positive message. But what's your take on his projected fantasy value?
Yeah, a lot of this, and I'll say that I was part of it too. I think there's a lot of it being overblown about kind of his situation. Oh, he signed till 2026. He can't come over. But like a team having to wait 3 years is not out of the realm for a top prospect in a lot of cases. If a player goes to college, you often are waiting a few years. So like you for an average prospect in top 10 that's maybe not a top 3 or 4 prospect, usually it's 2 years is typically kind of the waiting point. So 3 years is not the worst thing. That being said, just everything kind of going on in Russia, and I wouldn't be shocked if at the end of his contract before, Scott St. Petersburg tries to give him this massive amount of money that, it would take him a few years to be able to make in the NHL because he will have to do an NHL entry level contract. So he will be making less money pretty much right off the bat in the NHL. So there is that threat there. But from a pure talent perspective, this is a player that anytime he went up against Conor Bedard, specifically that 2021 Under-18 World Championship, he was the better player. Michkov has been the best player at every international tournament he's played in. The issue is we haven't been able to see that in a couple of years. I think when the big thing for him last year was he started the year injured, didn't get to really play with Scott St. Petersburg, and they sent him to HK Sochi. And that was so big for his development because he got to play top line minutes, top 6 minutes all season long. 27 games, 20 points. That's very incredible for a player that young. I believe that's one of the best draft eligible outputs we've ever seen from a KHL player. And he did it on a team that at the time when he joined them had 4 wins. They finished with 9. He more than doubled their win output at the end of the season. Not a lot of wins. The team was still really poor, but he went over and took control. And guys like that being able to do that is so impressive. Now, he is going to be going back to Scott St. Petersburg. They're a good team, so he still have to fight for his chances, but I'm very confident it's going to work out. So, I think that this is someone who could be getting 90 points in the NHL very early on in his career. Like you look at what Kirill Kaprizov did. Like Kirill Kaprizov was kind of like a late round, like we still weren't sure about him. With Michkov, most people are sure this guy's the real deal. I think he's going to get 90, 100 points in the NHL. It's going to take time, but if you're willing to wait, I think it's going to be worth the risk.
Yeah, that's going to be very exciting to see. And it's so true. But the KHL numbers, normally it's like, and he was one of the most dominant rookies in the KHL with a whopping 2 goals in 28 games. So the fact that he had 20 points is pretty unreal. Even Ovechkin had like nothing in his final year in the KHL, right? Okay, number 5, we have another, again, this draft class, as you wrote on the website this week, the centers, it's just an embarrassment of riches. And we have another one, Will Smith. So that's 3 centers in the top 5, 3 potential franchise centers. So what do you see? Because Will Smith's an interesting one because we know his real life value. He's known as a really intelligent player. So it's like, is he going to be better real life player? Is that going to translate into fantasy value?
Yeah, when it comes to Will Smith, people I think are really kind of just ragging on him for all the wrong reasons. This is a guy that's been dominant at every level he played at. And, this year a lot was made about Gabe Perreault being the top scoring player in U.S. national team development history. He had 132 points. Will Smith actually had 127 points, and he had a better point per game average, and was the guy that was creating so much of that offense. And he was the best player at the U18s, and he was the best player at the top prospects game. This guy is going to be the real deal. And going to watch him in college next year, I think a big thing for him will be working on his defensive play. They didn't necessarily need to. They would win these games sometimes 5-0 just because they would outscore the other team and Trey Augustine would do enough. But with him going next year to Boston College, he's going to have those same line mates, which is both good and bad. One hand, Boston College is going to have a very strong line right out of the gate with him, Perot, and Leonard. On the other hand, I would like to see him be able to play with other players. And we didn't get to see that kind of at a showcase events or anything. He was always playing with the same guys.
Hmm.
But this is the guy that was the play driver in that line. And I think he will be a play driver in the NHL one day. My guess here, it's a one and done at Boston College here, and he'll be ready pretty quickly. So if let's say, he falls to Montreal, that's my prediction at number 5. Like, this is a guy that could be your number 1 center quite quickly. And, a couple years ago, we were looking at Montreal maybe having only too many good young centermen, and then realistically, it didn't work out that way. I think Will Smith would really be able to kind of inject some new life into that group. So, wherever he goes, I think will be very important to see who he plays with. I think he still needs a guy who could shoot the puck, but he's always one of the there are games where you look at him and say it doesn't look like he's trying that hard, and you'll say it out loud, and then he'll score 3 goals in succession, and it's like that happened way too many times this year. I don't want to doubt him at this point. So I think 75-80 points is good. He'll have a lot of real life value, and in fantasy, I think that's just a guy that could find anybody who plays. I think almost a comparison is like Trevor Zegras. And if you like Trevor Zegras, you'll like Will Smith.
Interesting. And I'm wondering, the Habs, they do have 2 first-round picks. So imagine if they found a way. I don't know if Gabe Perreault would be available that late in the first round, but maybe you trade up to get both of them. That would be interesting.
They could.
Keep that magic.
I would expect Montreal to be trying to trade up in this draft.